Salutations, Nyx here again. Over the years, I've been through a lot of absurd storylines and pretty horrific situations with other players. But the most difficult subject that I find players have trouble with is actually romance at the table. It's a pretty tender subject in more ways than one. So let's talk through how we can engage with romantic content in our campaigns, because as much as our fabulous characters have beautiful and wonderful stories, everyone starts to waffle when it's time to start smashing their fictional faces together. Yes, but why romance?
But why male models?
Where there are people, there are emotions. With tabletop role-playing games, we're not only experiencing a wide range of emotions, we're also experiencing those emotions through our characters. And sometimes you'll be smack dab in the middle of a heavy role-playing scene when the characters are just seconds away from grappling with the cosmic horrors of the astral sea, and you start to realize your character has developed a really deep bond with another one. Those emotions sometimes just happen. But the great thing about those emotions is that we're still steering the proverbial character ship, and we can decide if we want that ship to become a ship. Of course, not every realization comes in a dramatic moment. Sometimes it's at the quiet fireside chat, or even long before session 1 you're thinking you might want to explore a romantic subplot. Now, before we get a little too deep, I want to say, keep in mind that your romantic subplot does not have to conform to traditional heteronormative standards. You don't have to explore physical intimacy. You don't have to do what people might consider a normal series of dates and late nights. Exploring a deep bond with another character can take many forms, and all of those forms can be considered romantic in whatever way that makes you feel valued, comfortable, and happy. So, let's actually start with the why.
You serious? I just told you that a moment ago.
Stories can be made or broken based on their emotional impact on a viewer participant. A romantic story is exactly the same way. There are books and movies that I simply can't engage with fully because I'm just not invested in the bonds between characters. Some friendships that are supposed to be meaningful and equal feel really lopsided and shallow, and some romances feel like the chemistry between the characters are non-existent at best. They're together because the writer said they had to be, and not together because they had to be, as like a cool tropey plot point, or maybe because there might have only been one bed or something. The weight of a story shifts dramatically when the big bad evil guy is now not just trying to do evil for the sake of doing evil, but has noticed the change between the party's chemistry and realizes that the waterbender is in love with the firebender. Now they can target the party and make one of you truly hurt. Or perhaps, like in one of the greatest boss battles I've ever had at the table, that fancy dress party you were super excited about because it'll be cute and fun transforms from a political event and an adorable celebration to a tension-filled war zone because of the appearance of a character's ex-wife. I'll explain another time. Suffice to say, the story and characters can grow based on their relationships in their lives. Before I get into how to add some romance to your table, I'd like to take a really small moment to define a term that I'll be using a lot throughout this video, and that's the term romance partner.
The things that are true about me are as follows. I am your romance partner, and I am from the Baronies.
Your romance partner is the person who's directly involved in a romance with your character. This is the person whom you will spend the most time talking with about all the features of your character's romantic story. This person might be another player who has a player character, but it can also be a non-player character played by your dungeon master or storyteller. I wanted to clarify because some people have the misconception that you can only have deep and interesting plots with another player or with only the DM. And that's honestly not always the case. Some of the best stories are because you have a little bit of both. And even in my case, I've had plenty of romances that have been NPCs and others that have been other players. So it's important to have a term that can combine those two things and make them one thing that we can understand a bit more clearly when we're talking about the subject. So you've decided you're interested in pursuing a romantic plot at the table. What's going to be your step 1? I'm going to be real with you. It's going to be talking about it. Spoiler alert, a lot of this is going to come down to some serious communication, so buckle up, buckaroo. As soon as you recognize your desire to go down the path of romance, you need to consider what I like to call the no-no list. Let's review the no-no list real quick for a romance. Number 1, this is not a space for you to explore your real feelings for a real person. Number 2, do not disrespect your fellow player's wishes. And number 3, do not use romance roleplay as leverage against another player or to establish an unbalanced power dynamic out of character. All right, with our no-nos covered, let's assume you're ready to move on into partnering it up. Why did I say it like that? The earliest you realize that you've got this romantic idea, you need to bring it to the person you'd like to have that subplot with. You want to make sure they're into the idea too. And if they aren't, respect their wishes and let it go. If they are interested, it's time to move forward with talking to the entire table. And I mean the entire table. I said this was going to be a lot of communication. I was serious. It may sound a little confusing, right? You might be thinking that, well, the only person who needs to be consulted is the person behind your romance partner. However, it's important to consider everyone at the table. When you come to the table looking for their blessing to explore romantic subplots in the campaign, you need to understand that fictional intimacy can be just as uncomfortable as real intimacy. It's really hard for some people to get into their emotions real deep and express them honestly. Not everyone is going to want to explore this concept with you, so you'll need to consider consent in that way. Your romance partner isn't the only one that's participating at the table. Being present at the table is participating. Some people don't want to play around certain types of content, and it's important to be respectful of their wishes. This is a multiplayer experience, and you don't want to force someone to partake in something they don't want to. Being at the table, even if the scene doesn't have every player character present, is still participation. They're still subject to viewing the moments others want to roleplay out. And you don't want to alienate them by making them feel uncomfortable because you really want to roleplay a type of scene that they just don't want to experience. If it helps, consider some safety tools to allow your table to respond anonymously. When you come to the table with this conversation, you need to make it clear what you want. Establish if you're after romance as a major focus of the campaign for your character or something a little less grand. Establish what you're interested in and willing to play at the table. Are you more of a fade to black type, or do you want to have more detailed scenes? How well it will suit the game and the story you've all chosen together is also really important to address. This also includes the really important conversation of what kind of romance you and your partners are after in terms of public consumption of your content. Is it, like E for everyone, which is cool, or, like Kirby's mouthful mode? You also need to take that feedback to heart. Not everyone wants the same things. Maybe your table is willing to allow romantic plots at the table, but they don't want to have it inform the pacing of the entire campaign, or they don't really want to have scenes for particular types of content. You can work around these requests if the table is willing. So, alright. What do you do if your table's not interested? So, let's first go with the assumption that your table isn't fully interested in in-depth romantic scenes during the game. You have a number of options to explore here that might satisfy you and your romance partner. One of the ways that I prefer to work around not being able to pursue romantic content at the table is to get writing. Take those ideas and make them into short stories, or talk to your romance partner about some one-on-one writing sessions to RP out some key moments that occurred off screen. Make sure that you have your romance partner's permission. Don't make me tell you again. Permission. Speaking of, don't use your fellow players, especially the players who didn't want to participate in your romantic content, in this writing without getting their permission. Frankly, I avoid using them entirely outside of referencing events that happen at the table if it's important for establishing the flow or the setting of a short story. The caveat to this, though, is that you should share it with your group. It can be very scary sharing your writing, especially if you don't write regularly, but it's super important for making your table feel included, valued, and respected for their choice, but not necessarily forced to participate against their will. Please respect your players. If you don't, I will find you. Okay, great. So what if the table doesn't want to see your whole romantic RP scene, but they do want to know what's happening if a romantic moment is applicable during the session? I prefer using some summaries or the tried and true fade to black. If you want some more detail but not to completely dodge the moments, you can summarize. A quick sentence or two will usually be enough for everyone to understand what's going on. If a summary is still too much, you can always go for the implication method using fade to black. Fade to black is a concept in romance writing that implies intimate scenes but then doesn't describe them, much like how a fade to black or a screen wipe is used in a movie. You can use this concept on less physically intimate moments as well, like deep conversations, kisses, naps, cuddles. All of it can be faded to black. Literally anything can be faded to black if you want it. Now that you've established that you can have your romantic plot, let's talk about some bits that help make actualizing that plot a lot easier. Writing or playing with love is not always smooth and easy from the start. You and your romance partner will have different ideas as to what constitutes a romantic moment and even when to have those moments. Romance is intimate, it's personal, and it can open a lot of vulnerable parts of your person. can open a lot of wounds. We all have very unique personal experiences with the subject, and not all of those experiences are positive. Romance involves a lot of failure and despair and misery as much as it involves those wonderful, joyous moments. Your choice to engage with this sort of content at the table might involve all of those feelings and more. For that reason, it's really important to begin by keeping your lines of communication open. You and your romance partner need to be able to sit down and talk about how things are going and how you feel with respect for one another and honesty in regards to your opinions. You have to work together to craft this type of story. You can start with making some plans. If you've got an idea in mind as to how you want your romance to go, then plan that out with your partner. Don't expect them to know what you want beforehand because, well, they aren't mind readers, unfortunately. Telepathy is not real. Decide what steps you're going to take in your romantic journey. Consider some really important notes that are in most romance stories. For example, what kind of romance are you after? Think about tropes and roles for this one, like enemies to lovers, forbidden love, married couples, polycules, and so on. When do those characters begin having feelings? When and how do the characters start acting on those feelings? Are they really obvious? Are they kind of subtle? Choose those obstacles too. What's keeping your characters apart? And finally, what's going to bring them together? This last one might take a while to figure out and could even happen as an epilogue at the end of the campaign. As those conversations continue around planning and expectations, you can move into more elaborate moments. This can help with emotional clarity, such as when your romantic pairing starts having disagreements and you want to make sure there's no actual hard feelings. Or this can help you avoid awkwardness when you're ready to have your first kiss and your romance partner didn't think now was the time. A way you can work up to being on the same page as your romance partner at the table outside of communicating is to come up with a tell, like a gesture or a certain look that indicates that this moment is a romantic opportunity. Finally, for the how-tos, make sure to keep your DM in the loop if they aren't your romance partner. You don't want to blindside them and make them have to improv a moment that's super important to you for your romance plot. Doubly so if that moment is really related to a lot of drama and arguing, or it's a really specific romantic occurrence that you've been really badly wanting. Now, what games will allow all this romantic plotting to unfold the best? So for our first game, let's consider one of the core games that many people are playing these days and have been for many years, including myself, which will be Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder. I'm grouping these two together because they both have a very similar problem. The adventures and campaigns presented to players just aren't really romantic. Some of them don't even touch on NPCs having a relationship longer than a few words saying those guys are married or those guys were roommates. Or two characters being involved as kind of a short bit of backstory or a teeny subsection never to be actively touched on again. Most of their adventures and campaigns heavily focus on the action-adventure aspects of role-playing games. This usually means that your table isn't fully considering that an in-depth character-driven subplot like a romance is going to happen. They're kind of already prepared for the action-adventure that's already right in front of them. So, unfortunately, romance in Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder is going to take a little bit of role-playing work to make really happen. But it's totally possible. I've done it many times, so keep those hopes up and you'll be able to do it, no problem. So now let's consider some games that do romance a little better and are somewhat easier to find a game for. So World of Darkness is a really good one. The entire premise of World of Darkness involves around the concept of humanity within the supernatural. Sometimes that humanity explores sins and survival and heroism, and sometimes literally romance. Vampire the Masquerade can get really deep in the romance subplots, given their penchant for exploring desires and cravings, as well as what happens when they reckon with their previous human life. A past relationship haunting a player or a new kind of budding relationship are very common points in this game. Another really good one is Fantasy Flight Games' Star Wars RPG, which starts with Edge of the Empire. Now, this isn't because the rules have anything special for romance. It's actually because of the perception of Star Wars itself. Star Wars is well known for its main character couples, Han and Leia, Anakin and Padme, Obi-Wan and Satine, for examples. Having romance be involved in the core lore for the setting makes it way easier to accept it as part of the game and engage with it when you need to. Also, Star Wars RPG did a really good job with its social classes, talents, and skills, so it's a really good place for any level of conversational scenarios. And finally, our juiciest thing, Games absolutely steeped in romance. Some of these I have played, some of them I have only read, some of them I have recently heard of in researching for this video. Starting at the top is going to be Thirsty Sword Lesbians, because it's exactly what it is on the tin. It's Thirsty Sword Lesbians. It's an amazing game built with Powered by the Apocalypse that has mechanics for the power of emotions and emphasizes LGBTQIA stories. Monster Hearts is all about exploring what it's like to be neck deep in teenage drama and personal horrors as you become something supernatural. And let's face it, as teenagers, romance was all over the place. Good Society, a Jane Austen RPG, is exactly what you'd imagine living in an Austen novel would be like. It's all about Regency tropes and drama, like marrying for money over love or navigating socio-political schemes wrapped up in relationships. You can totally get your Bridgerton on. Beyond Reach is one I am super intrigued by. It's a 2-player game where one of you is a pilot and the other is playing the mech, writing like letters back and forth, only knowing each other from a distance, and there's no confirmation built in that either of you is truly listening to the other. I'm so curious. I really want to play that one. And a special shout out for Starcross, which is a 2-player RPG entirely story-based that is all romance. It also uses a wooden block tower as a representation for the physical tension inherent in romantic storylines. Ginny D did an excellent video on this one. You should totally go check it out. I watched it like 3 times. Thank you for watching to the end of this video. It was a lot of fun doing the research for this one and really digging into like what made some of my own personal romances successful and what made some not super successful. But it was fun. It was a lot of fun. The only downside now is every algorithm thinks I'm a romance novelist, and I've been getting some interesting recommendations. It's cool though, you know, just pray for me. If you've got any fun stories about your in-game romances or have any fun tips to share about how to get your love on at the table, please drop me a comment, okay? I'd really love to hear about it. And as always, do the stuff in the below place and go make a little charmfoolery.